Forget the Vikings you see in movies feasting on roast boar and drinking mead from golden horns. That was the diet of the 1%. For the rest of the Norse population, survival didn't come from a slaughterhouse, it came from the dirt. While history remembers the axes and the shields, it was a secret arsenal of weeds, roots, and wild greens that actually kept the Viking Age alive. These weren't just vegetables. They were biological weapons against the most lethal killer of the North, the winter famine. Among these green saviors, one stood above the rest, revered as a gift from the gods themselves, Angelica. To the modern eye, it looks like a common weed, but to a Viking sailor facing months on the open ocean, it was more valuable than gold. Why? Because it was the cure for scurvy. Long before we knew what vitamin C was, the Norse understood that chewing on the dried roots or stalks of Angelica kept their teeth from falling out and their gums from bleeding. It was so critical that Icelandic laws were written specifically to protect Angelica gardens. Stealing, it wasn't just petty theft, it was a crime against survival. But Angelica was just the beginning. As the snow melted and the hunger gap arrived, that deadly period when the winter stores were empty, but the summer crops hadn't grown, the Vikings turned to a plant that fought back. They ate the one thing most modern gardeners try to kill: the stinging nettle. It sounds like madness to eat a plant that burns your skin on contact, but the Vikings knew a secret: boiling water disarms the trap. Urtica dioica, the stinging nettle, was the first fresh green to emerge from the frozen earth. It was a nutritional powerhouse packed with more iron than spinach and loaded with protein. For a population suffering from winter anemia and fatigue, a bowl of nettle soup was like a blood transfusion. It wasn't just food, it was a blood-quickening tonic that woke the body up from its winter hibernation. While nettles provided the iron, the forest floor provided the flavor. Imagine a diet of bland porridge and dried fish day after day. It's enough to break your spirit. Then you find Ramson's wild garlic. These broad, pungent leaves carpeted the woodlands, filling the air with a savory scent that promised salvation from culinary boredom. But Ramsons were more than a condiment. They are rich in allicin, a natural antibiotic. By adding them to their stews, the Vikings were unknowingly fighting off the bacterial infections that plagued their settlements. It was a primitive form of medicine that tasted delicious. But greens and garlic can't fill an empty belly. To survive the calorie deficit of a Nordic winter, you need something heavier. You need a root that refuses to die. Enter the wild turnip. Today we treat turnips as a boring side dish, but in the Viking Age, they were the foundation of the food pyramid. These hardy roots could be left in the ground long after the first frost, acting as a natural refrigerator. But the real genius was in eating the tops. Viking turnip greens were a superfood containing 4 times the calcium of the root itself. It was a dual-purpose crop that fed the livestock and the farmer, ensuring that nothing went to waste. But even the turnip requires planting. The Vikings had an even better ally, a plant that planted itself. Fat hen. This weed, also known as white goosefoot, thrived in the muck and mire behind the longhouses. It grew in the dung heaps and the disturbed soil where nothing else would take root. And it was a nutritional monster, boasting more protein per gram than cabbage. It was the ultimate free lunch, growing in the shadow of the latrines and feeding the families that couldn't afford to farm. Its cousin lamb's quarters was just as prolific. Related to quinoa, this plant produced thousands of seeds that could be ground into a nutrient-dense flour. It was a famine-proofer, a plant that exploded with life just when the Vikings needed it most. It turned the very weeds of the field into the bread of life. While the fields provided greens, the coastlines offered something even more potent. Sea kale. This wasn't just a vegetable, it was an endurance athlete. Thriving in the salty, sandy spray of the North Sea, kale is one of the few plants that contain significant amounts of vitamin C, 6 times more than lemons. For coastal communities and raiding parties, this plant was the difference between life and death. It could be pickled in barrels of whey and taken on long voyages, a crunchy, salty shield against disease. But the Vikings didn't just look for vitamins, they looked for pain relief. In the damp meadows, they found meadowsweet. This plant smells like almonds and vanilla, but its chemistry is far more interesting. It contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. A tea made from meadowsweet was the Viking Advil, soothing the aching joints of warriors and the fevers of children. It was a pharmacy hiding in plain sight, blurring the line between dinner and medicine. And for a crop that could outlast the farmer, they turned to the Welsh onion. This perennial plant never died. You planted it once, and it divided and multiplied forever. It was the infinite onion, providing fresh green shoots as soon as the snow cleared. For a poor family, a patch of Welsh onions was a generational inheritance, a guarantee of flavor that required zero effort. Sometimes survival looks like royalty. Good King Henry sounds like a monarch, but it was a peasant's best friend. This spinach-like plant was a cut-and-come-again miracle. You could harvest the shoots like asparagus in spring, eat the leaves like spinach in summer, and cook the flower buds like broccoli in autumn. It was 3 vegetables in one, a perennial provider that asked for nothing but a patch of dirt. But if you wanted a taste of the ocean without getting wet, you dug for salsify. Known as the vegetable oyster, this root has a strange seafood-like flavor when boiled. It was a culinary magic trick, turning the cold earth into a creamy, savory feast. It was particularly valuable during Christian fasting days in the later Viking era, providing a meaty experience without breaking religious laws. However, when the ground was frozen too hard to dig, the Vikings looked up. The forests of Scandinavia were filled with hazelnuts. These weren't just snacks, they were calorie bombs. A handful of hazelnuts contains more energy than a slab of meat. They were the original energy bar, easily stored, resistant to rot, and packed with the fats needed to keep a body warm in sub-zero temperatures. Finally, to cut through the grease of a fatty winter diet, they harvested sorrel. This small, unassuming leaf packs a punch of sour, lemony flavor. It was the Viking citrus, a burst of acid that brightened up the heavy gray porridges. But more importantly, it was another massive source of vitamin C. It grew early in the spring, often pushing through the snow, offering a tangy promise that winter was finally ending. These 13 plants, weeds, roots, and nuts were the unsung heroes of the Viking Age. They didn't win battles, but they won the war against starvation. They proved that the Vikings were not just brute warriors, they were master botanists who understood their environment intimately. They saw value where we see weeds, and they found medicine where we see dirt. The story of Viking food is a story of resilience. It challenges our modern perception of what food is. We rely on supermarkets and global supply chains. They relied on the ditch behind their house and the seaweed on the beach. Their survival wasn't guaranteed by gold or steel, but by the ability to recognize the nutritional goldmine hiding in a patch of stinging nettles. So, the next time you weed your garden, take a second look. That pest you're pulling up might just be the superfood that kept an entire civilization alive. The Vikings didn't just survive the cold, they ate it. But knowing what to eat was only half the battle. The real challenge was keeping it edible when the sun disappeared for months at a time. Without refrigeration, how did they keep meat from rotting and milk from spoiling? The answer involves bugs, bacteria, and a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of chemistry. If you think eating weeds is intense, wait until you see how they preserve their food. It involves burying things in the ground for months and hoping they don't kill you. Click the next video to discover the brutal, smelly, and brilliant world of Viking food preservation. You won't believe what they did with butter.